Hi everyone, it's me again, Kathleen from ZenART Supplies, and today I'll be showing you how to draw and paint the Cornucopia using watercolor. I'll be mainly painting, so you will see the colors I'll be using, very autumny colors like this. So if you'd like to see the full drawing and if you'd like to save it, go to our website, ZenART Supplies. It will be there in the article, so you can download it. It's available for downloading and use it as your guide or trace over it or be inspired from it. It's up to you. So stay with me and I'll begin painting shortly. And here are the materials I'll be using. First, watercolor paper. I taped it down on a wooden panel using masking tape. Then watercolor brushes from the Turner collection and Fine Line collection of ZenART Supplies. The Allegro palette, also from ZenART Supplies. This is our watercolor palette containing more of the warm colors, as you can see. Paper towel or other absorbent material, and your color palette to be used, plus a mixing plate, and also your reference photo if you're painting from one. And here I will be planning the colors I'll be using before I start painting. This is always a good idea, especially if you're going to be using more colors than usual. I'll start out by looking at my reference photo and checking the colors. Here is the Turner collection. This is the full collection. And here are the round brushes I'll be using. And I'll also need brushes from the Fine Line for the little details later on. And here are my three favorite brushes that I always use. The angle brush, a really small round brush, and the rigger brush. And now let's start swatching the colors out. I'll start with the pumpkins. I'm using lemon yellow with yellow deep and English red. And for the other pumpkins, Drawn Brilliant with Scarlet. And then for the apples, Crimson, and then some Viridian to tone down the vibrancy in some areas. And Lemon Yellow with Aureolin Green, and then again Crimson. And then for the mangoes, Lemon Yellow with Aureolin Green and some olive green. And now onto the pear, using Lemon Yellow with Yellow Deep and a little bit of raw sienna. And now for the autumn leaves, Yellow Deep with Scarlet, and then also some English red. And now for the yellow corn, Lemon Yellow with Yellow Deep. And for the red corn, Carmine, and then some French ultramarine again to tone down the redness. And there you have it. And now let's start painting. With watercolor, the rule is to first start out with your lightest colors for the first layer. In this case, it will be the different yellows, either the lemon yellows, the yellow deep, or a mix of both. Most of the fruits and vegetables in this composition have the first layer as yellow. So when you look at a fruit, don't just see the outward color. Most fruits have different colors mixed in them, and that's how you can make your fruits look 3D. And here I'm adding aureolin green to the apples and also the tip of some mangoes. And now using raw sienna for the rim of the basket as well as its body. So just really loosely painting over the first layers. And now using lemon yellow for the autumn leaves, then adding scarlet, and then some English red. So I just really am doing a wet and wet application for the autumn leaves and allowing the color and pigment to just spread on its own, on their own. And now I'm mixing yellow deep with scarlet to create this nice orange for the shadows and the extra color for the pumpkin on top. Also filling in the lines, and then some olive green for the stem. And now I'm getting some vermilion and just painting under that pumpkin because I think there's an apple under. So the first layer is bright, but it will be covered later with several layers to deepen it. And now for this apple on top, I used crimson and then painting around the white highlight. So if you forgot to leave the white highlight, or if you'd rather put it for last and you're not too strict, you can always use white gouache or white acrylic or a white gel pen to paint the highlight in. And now for this other apple, it has streaks. So what I did is I first wet it and then drew streaks, and the streaks will slowly spread a little bit because the surface was wet, and that's going to give a texture of this apple. And again, I color lifted some of the red parts out for the white highlight. And now I'm getting some carmine, adding some French ultramarine, and putting the second layer over the top apple to deepen the color. So just keep going back and forth from your reference to your work just to guide you along the way. And now I'm adding red ochre to the apple below in shadow, and also some French ultramarine. So just really mixing reds, browns, and blue to create the shadowed shape under. And now adding some burnt sienna to this pumpkin for the shadow parts where it's near the inside of the basket. Adding the lines, other details. So the key to watercolor is patience and water control, but really a lot of it is patience. So just have patience to get past the weird stage and just keep layering. And now for this mango, I think it's a mango anyway, I deepened the color with aureolin green and then olive green for the shadowed parts. And this apple is similar to the one on top, so again starting with crimson and leaving the highlights, painting around the highlights, leaving the paper white, or the first layer, the very pale yellow. And then color lifting some parts out for the highlight that's not so white, but you know, there's still some highlight. So the easiest time to color lift is when the paint is still wet, but not to worry, you can still do it when it's dry. It'll just be much harder, especially if the paint or the color, the pigment is the staining kind. And here again, I'm adding French ultramarine, again to temper the brightness of the red and to give it that deep red color that this apple has. And then going back to the apple in between the two and adding another layer of crimson with vermilion to further brighten and deepen the really nice bright red. So these two apples have different kinds of red. And now to this pumpkin. So this pumpkin is more orange than the first one we did. So I started off with Jaune Brilliant as the first layer. As the next layer following the yellow. As well as the one behind, also Jaune Brilliant. So it's a nice yellow-orange. And here for the pear, I deepened the yellow and then added raw sienna around this area for the shadow. And then I'll stop myself and just go back later. And again, for the next one, this is a mango. Layering aureolin green, leaving some parts lighter for the highlight. Covering the other one again. So again, just work in layers. Remember, watercolor, when you paint it, even if it looks vibrant, it'll dry lighter. So just keep layering until you get your desired color. Here I'm using English red and scarlet to fill in the shadows, the lines, the texture of the pumpkin. So this pumpkin isn't very ridged, it's more of, it has fine lines. So the shadowing won't be as deep. Again, going back to the green mango and just really layering the colors. And now I'm back to the red with the red apple with the streaks. So I first applied another layer of lemon yellow and while it's still wet, added the red crimson streaks so that the apple has the texture that I can see from my reference photo. So because the paper is still wet, the pigment will still travel, but it'll still keep the streaks, that kind of texture, but not too edged, not too hard. So it'll soften the look of the streaks. So just take your time. As long as it's still wet, it's still gonna be very workable. So here I'm just really pulling on the paint in some areas and just spreading it. And now I'm not exactly sure what vegetable or fruit this is, as it's from the top. I'm assuming it's some kind of pumpkin, but it also has a black part. Now I'm layering in the bottom of the pumpkin. It's more shadowed, so it will be scarlet. And now yellow deep again for the autumn leaves. And then I just add dabs of scarlet. I just dab it with my brush and then it'll just slowly spread magically. So if you like this kind of look, then the wet on wet technique is the way to do it. So now I'm getting some English red, and then using my rigger brush, I will draw in the ridges, the shadowed parts of the pumpkin. So the rigger is really great for this because it has a long, sharp point. and it can hold a lot of water and pigment, and the control you have over your details is really, really good. And now I'm going to fill in the last, oh no, not yet the last, another autumn leaf. So as you can see, I'm working around my paper because I'm giving the other fruits and vegetables time to dry before I go back to them. For more precise painting, I use wet and dry. So for most of the fruits and vegetables, I use wet and dry, and for the leaves and the apple with streaks, I use wet and wet. So just experiment with the different watercolor techniques so that you can see what works best for your style of painting, what your preference is, because again, it's all a matter of preference. So here again, for all the autumn leaves, I'm really just starting off with yellow deep, then dabs of scarlet, and then also dabs of English red. So you have those three vibrant, beautiful colors, and just dab them and allow them to spread and mix with each other softly. And now for the red corn again, like how we swatched earlier, carmine, because this has like a pinkish purplish tinge. It's a red with a pinkish purplish tinge to it, so it's perfect for the red corn. So that's the first layer, and now I'm using burnt sienna, using burnt sienna to fill in the inside of the basket. So this is shadowed. So I'm going to be mixing different kinds of browns to deepen the shadowed parts. So if it's the apple, I'm using red ochre for it. And if it's just around the basket, I'm using more of the warmer browns without red. And then filling in the stem of the fruits that I think are almost finished. So really just going around, adding little bits and pieces, adding layers, and just moving around the whole work. So at this point, I'm starting to fill in the back, the shadows, so that I can also judge my work better and see if some colors need deepening or brightening. So this is the stage where you can get to judge your work better. Remember, there's always the awkward or ugly or weird stage, so just bear with it and get past that, because you'll get to the stage where you see things start to come together. So it's really important, if you're getting frustrated or if you feel like you're just gonna stop already, actually it's a good idea to stop at that point and take a break. You can always come back to it later with fresher eyes, and you will see that, oh my gosh, it wasn't so bad, I just really needed a break. So now I'm going back to the stalks or the stems of the pumpkins, and I used lamp black but watered down, so it's like grayish. And now I'm filling in the rows of the corn. So I'm just starting off with straight lines and then the curved lines along the body, and then softening the edges so that they're not square but more rounded. So that's my way of doing the corn. Instead of doing each one by one, I start out crisscrossing the lines and just softening the edges. And then to the red corn, using red ochre and doing the same technique I did with the yellow corn. Horizontal line and then curved lines along, and then softening the edges so that they're more rounded. So if you looked at the reference photo, there are actually more fruits and vegetables. There are even grapes. So I just really removed a lot of them because grapes are another challenge and it's too much for this composition. So let's leave that for another time. As it is right now, it's already very bountiful with all of these fruits and vegetables that I decided to include. But of course, feel free to include all the other fruits and vegetables in the reference photo. It's up to you. They'll all be there in the article, so just go to ZenART Supplies and go under Toolkits and the article will be there. It'll have the sketch that you can download, it'll have the reference photo that you can also save. And here I'm darkening the basket around the fruits because of course it will be shadowed. So really it's the refining part, adding browns and watered down blacks to some areas to deepen the shadow. And here using burnt umber to draw in the texture of the basket, the details. And then raw sienna to deepen the color. So that was the first layer, but a watered down lighter version, and now I'm just deepening it here and there. And then burnt sienna for the body. So the basket, the body of the basket is a different material and it has a more orange, a brown orange tinge. So I'm just gonna leave it there to dry and work on the other parts. So I'm using various colors for the pumpkins that are orange. I would use English red to deepen the corners, the edges. And since this part is dry, I can already add the texture of the basket. So just very loosely, not exactly as how it looks in the reference photo. So you don't have to, you don't have to follow exactly like a photograph what you see in the reference photo. Do what you like to do. If you want to paint even loosely than I do, then go ahead, have fun. So again, after adding the lines and the texture of the basket, I'm just adding shadows here and there to add more depth to the shape. Using burnt sienna to deepen this lower part because this is where it rests on the surface and it will be more shadowed because it's far from the light. So here it's almost finished, and now I'm gonna add the surface color, and one of my favorites to use is from the Serena collection that I showed earlier. It's indigo. So indigo is very subdued, so it's a really nice color for the background. So I'm filling it here and there. So darkening some parts around the leaves, the fruits, and just slowly fading as it moves away. So areas around the elements in your composition will be shadowed because of course it blocked the light, so it'll create shadows. So just keep in mind where your source of light is so you can judge where the shadows should be, where the highlights are, and things like that. And again, even with this background, this surface, you can also do this in layers. Okay, and this is almost finished.
And that's it for today. Thank you for staying with me and for joining me. I hope that you learned something and this will inspire you to paint your very own cornucopia and of course other autumn themed paintings. So our Allegro palette, as you can see, is really perfect because it has all the warm colors for all the autumn themed works that you plan to paint. And here's the finished work again. Alright, so thank you for joining me again, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!